Hey everybody, today I'm going to be reviewing Blonde. This film was directed by Andrew Dominik. He is an Australian-born director and he is most known likely for the assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, which is very kind of poetic and artistic, and it gained traction over time, I think. And it's one of the reasons a lot of people were interested in this biopic of Marilyn Monroe. Artistically and aesthetically, for sure, I was intrigued, but I admit I was a little bit skeptical at the same time, just because, and I've talked about this a lot on this channel, but I tend to be kind of skeptical of biopics. They're not my favorite subgenre. I'm not saying I think this about all biopics or anything like that, but there's just something inherently strange about bringing historical figures back to life. It's like kind of resurrecting their corpses in a weird way, and it's like they're kind of puppets, and you're like mimicking every word they say and every gesture. And I think a lot of the very eerie meta aspects of things tend to be kind of lost on Hollywood for the most part, because they see biopics more as vehicles for Oscar gain, for Oscar nominations. They tend to be formulaic, very watered down, romanticized versions of icons that we know in a very different way. And a lot of times you think, they're trying to strip away a lot of what we know them as in terms of persona and trying to show more vulnerability. But ironically, a lot of the time it feels like they create more of a distance with that dramatization. And I don't know, I just feel like artistic reinterpretations tend to be more masturbatory than anything. And so when it comes to this film and Dominik's interpretation of the Marilyn Monroe story, I will be honest, I did not like the film. Certainly not. I struggled with a lot of aspects of it, especially in the second half of it. That said, I don't hate it, and I don't hate it as much as I think a lot of people do. It seems to be kind of controversial. Some see it as very exploitive and offensive. I don't know, for myself, when I was watching it, I can say that I do partially respect what they were attempting, because I do feel like if you were going to make a movie about, a famous icon like this, I do think often the best way is to kind of deconstruct the biopic, or the nature of the biopic somewhat. But the problem with this film conceptually, I think, is that it's not rooted in anything that is meaningful or that connects us to anything that is emotional or concrete within the narrative. And therefore, it just kind of feels like gold dust that is slipping through your fingers and you're not grabbing onto anything. But, it shimmers in a beautiful way, because it is a stunning film. Holy crap, is it stunning. And I think Ana de Armas at the center of it is one of the more compelling embodiments of an icon that I have seen, a Hollywood icon that I have seen for the movies in a very long time. Bravo to her for her amazing work, and bravo to the art direction and just the sound design, all of it. But just as an experience, an emotional experience orchestrated, it's just not coming together. It feels very hollow. What we see typically in these kinds of movies is kind of like a montagey representation of things, where we're just like, we're breezing through a historical person's life, very much like Spark Notes. We get to see these big defining moments, but they are re-dramatized. And instead here, with this movie, it's almost like they're creating kind of a condensed psychedelic fever dream. And that is the framework for this particular story, the framework for Marilyn's life. But it is more kind of like he is weaving all these different aspects of the human experience together. And it is filtered through the cinematic voyeurism. And I think, yeah, he's certainly aware of that. He just doesn't quite know how to flesh it out, I think. Hence the attempt, I think, at creating something that is a little bit, or it has that edge, that exploitive edge, certainly, that it's going for, an attempt to really needle into that shimmery, glossy presence. But he's also reinforcing his own fascination with it, and naturally the fascination an audience has with it, and kind of looking at that in a different way, or attempting to. And the images in the film, like I said, they are absolutely stunning, and I think out of context in particular, they're just so haunting. There's just a texture and a richness to a lot of the images that we are seeing, but it is always tinged with that dreamy, hazy feeling, like I mentioned before, and that droning nature of like trauma becoming more visually pronounced. And in that sense, it had a real experimental vibe. It almost reminded me of like Roman Polanski's Repulsion, starring Catherine Deneuve, and yeah, just because it's like, it's a gorgeous woman we're seeing in front of us in a very cinematic film, but there is something slightly off-putting about it, or sometimes very off-putting about it. Watching the film, it feels like there's a disease surging through it. Just the hums of the camera, or like the buzz of the stage lights as they turn on, and they're very harsh. There's a prickly sharpness to a lot of those different sounds. The movie gives me this feeling of, it's like I'm going to this red carpet event. It's glitzy, it's glamorous, and there's a red carpet, but I go around the corner And it's like I'm seeing all of these like doctor tools, like scalpels and syringes, all in service of creating that very surreal, nightmarish downward spiral. This film, like I said, it's trying to tackle a lot of things. It's trying to explore the nature between art and life, and how like personas and perceptions of somebody kind of blend in strange ways with what is real, what is personal, and vice versa. And in that sense, and I felt this very early on in the movie, I don't really think that this film is necessarily about Marilyn Monroe, and I don't think even that the director is that interested in Marilyn Monroe as a person. I think he's more interested in her as a persona. He's interested in icons in Hollywood in a grander sense, and kind of the loosening of those metaphors, and then just trying to create abstractions out of that. And remember, the movie is not called Marilyn or anything like that. It's called Blonde. The film is blending kind of Freudian ideas and cyclical evolution concepts, and all of it in a very lethargic type of way, as we are fading in and out of these very overwrought birthing metaphors. A lot of devices in this film get repetitive to the point where they lose a lot of their power, I think. There is a point, I think, in the movie where somebody says, like Marilyn, the name Marilyn, it's almost like you gave birth to yourself. Just a lot of the lines in the movie, they're just too on the nose. And a lot of the images as well, even though they look stunning out of context, in context, a lot of the times it's like, oh, give me a break. And it's a big problem because it feels very pretentious and lofty, yet empty in what it's saying, and that's just a really bad combination, I think. The Freudian aspects of the film for me were the least interesting part of it, or I think the part that was the most on the nose. And of course, this all revolves around this need for Marilyn to find that father figure in her life, and how she is basically searching for that father figure in every man that she dates, every man that she marries, and her husbands in the film she calls daddy. And no, I'm not kidding. She does actually refer to them as daddy, but I don't know. I think for me, some of the more compelling ideas in the movies that they're kind of, touching on is the idea of Marilyn being both drawn to the spotlight of Hollywood as well as being averse to it. When it comes to neglected people, particularly, actors and such, I find it interesting seeing that crossover between the kind of the exhibitionism and the masochism that they tend to grow into, as it is tied to the Hollywood persona. And especially for a woman, that can get very complicated. It's like, what does it mean to need to be seen, or have a feeling of wanting to be seen versus wanting to hide? And then, exhibitionism versus, and sexiness and all of that, versus the desire for respect, the desire for wanting to be seen as dignified. And these are questions that I think the majority of women ask themselves as they begin to lose their innocence. And I would have liked to see more of that complexity in the film. And I'd like to see how all of that ties into the voyeurism of the film. I think, the big problem with this film is that Marilyn needs to be more of an active participant in it, for me, from my point of view. Because I do wonder, as I'm watching the film, are we seeing this more from like the point of view of Marilyn, where it's like it's her kind of masochistic fever dream as she's dying, or is it more kind of the filmmaker's sadistic point of view that we're experiencing? I see it as a combination of the two, and that's the real dichotomy. And a huge problem here too is that a lot of the abstractions in the film are way too ambiguous. And again, a lot of it is because there's not much to thread it all together in terms of emotion, in terms of depth. And Marilyn is seen in almost every moment of the film as the submissive, as victimized, and it just gets very, very monotonous. And wrestling, I think, between control and lack thereof for me is what would have given the film a lot more bite than it currently has. From the very beginning, she is seen as unwanted. She is hated by her schizophrenic mother, and she's told by her that her father never wanted her either. She's, I think, raped right in her first audition, and a lot of her fans here are just men that look like ravenous pigs. She is thrown down, she is dragged, she is coddled, she is told they're there by doctors and nurses and professionals throughout the movie, and she's always in this kind of frenzied state of hysteria, it seems, especially in the third act. It's just constant. And again, that one-sided kind of victimization allows for the mythology, I think, to thrive even more, and the distance to be felt even more. And I've always thought it was very funny the way people romanticize Marilyn Monroe. It's like, people will credit her with saying these very deep, wise quotes that she didn't actually say. And there is kind of a weird romanticism of her acting ability as well. It's like a lot of people are saying, oh, she was like this great actor, she could have been Brando. And it's like, again, I think you guys are exaggerating things because of the way that history is seen. She's certainly a presence, a great performer, and she has fantastic comedic timing and just really charismatic on the screen and all of that. Master of body movement. Just the way that she can kind of mold herself into any situation very slowly, almost like butter melting on toast. And she was, believe it or not, a real person, and I don't see her as some great actress. I see her as somebody who had some talents in certain areas, and I don't know, all that kind of stuff I think would be very interesting to explore. The nature of mythology. Just give some tread in the tires to this fever dream. I want to see all kinds of different shades to Marilyn. I want to see Marilyn be funny because, again, she is so funny, and this film is lacking all of that. And also, I want to see Marilyn be a bitch because I'm sure that she could. And it's like, we need to see the parts of her life where she had to take ownership, because trust me, nobody climbs to the top of Hollywood in that way without breaking a few eggs to make an omelet. And none of this like, who, me, kind of, manipulative tactics that she uses. It's like, I want to see, who's behind that manipulation. And, I don't know. I don't see Marilyn as just like this helpless lamb being led to the slaughter in slow motion, like this film would lead you to believe. It's like, yeah, I think she experienced a lot of unjust scrutiny, absolutely, because naturally she's a public figure. There's just more to every story, especially the ones that are heavily mythologized in this way. And yeah, I don't know. I look at this movie, it's like a bunch of lovely little morsels, and they all look very enticing. The moment I bite into them, it's like, I am very disappointed. Honestly, it's like Russell Stover's chocolates. It's like, they look very lovely, and I'm sorry if you're a fan of those, but I am not. They look lovely. They look like any other chocolate. The moment I bite into it, it's like, ugh, that is definitely a Russell Stover's chocolate. There's also a lot of stuff that I felt would have given this film a lot more meat. It's like, we don't see, between her childhood and suddenly when she is Marilyn Monroe. And I feel like those are important times that were very formative, I'm sure. I just want more kind of human relationships and interactions that, breathe life into a lot of these abstractions. And maybe a lot less scenes of like Marilyn crying in slow motion while it's like all these ravenous fans are like screaming at her with like distorted Lynchian mouths. They all just come off as artful gimmicks. And then again, a lot of these nightmarish devices that they're using, they repeat over and over and over again, but the more that it does that, the less meaningful it becomes. And then by the very end, I feel very distant from the subject. I feel, she's dying and I don't care. And so, that's a problem for me. It's trying to tackle all kinds of things, but does it really know what it's about? Ultimately, that I don't know if I'm quite sure about. And that's a problem when the structure is very thin, very faulty. And it's also unfortunate because Ana de Armas, as I mentioned, does a fantastic job. This is her showcase as an actress, and it gives her the chance to really be charismatic in the way a movie star needs to be. She is vulnerable. Obviously, she's very magnetic, but what I think is really great is that she is able to be liberated somewhat. She finds a freedom in the character within the confines of this very narrow narrative. She's somehow giving that really interesting dimension. And yeah, like I said, just so many artists I commend that came together for this film. I just wish the actual project had more of that self-awareness. And that way I think it would be less of a messy and unpleasant experience. Obviously, if you're interested in Marilyn Monroe, or you're interested in cinema, naturally you're probably going to see this. I know a lot of people are interested because it is controversial, but I think just looking at it, I don't think I could recommend it, though I can appreciate certain things about it. But that is my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to plug my website as always. It is deepfocuslens.com. I'm an artist. I do commission portraits, and I also sell prints of my work. If that is something that you're interested in, you can always go to the website below. And if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below as well. Also, I'd like to give a shout out to my patrons who are wonderful. Guys, thank you so much for your support. If you are interested in supporting, the link for that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.